Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Luong. I'm a partner in Husch Blackwell's Technology Manufacturing and Transportation Group. I'm also the co-founder and co-lead of the firm's Psychedelic and Emerging Therapies practice group. Thank you so much for joining our program today. Before we begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console, there are multiple application icons for your use during the program today. If you have any questions during the webcast, please submit via the question box. We will try to answer all questions during the webcast today, but if a further answer is needed or we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. A PDF of the presentation is available in the program materials folder, and this program has been approved for legal education hours. To report your hours, click on the CEU icon at the bottom of the screen. A certificate of attendance, including course numbers, will be emailed to you tomorrow, along with a recording of the webcast for watching and sharing. Toward the end of the program, be sure to complete our short survey. We use your feedback to plan future programs that are applicable to your business needs. That's all for the housekeeping items. I'd love to introduce myself and my team. As I said, my name is Karen Luong. Very happy to be here today. I'm a partner at Husch Blackwell. I'm based in Los Angeles. I'm a defense litigator specializing in dangerous or toxic substances and products. Now, Husch Blackwell is a nationwide law firm with over 1,000 attorneys. We are the first AmLaw 100 firm to develop a practice group specifically focused on helping researchers, drug developers, businesses, and practitioners in psychedelics. And presenting with me today is Kimberly Chu, Natasha Sumner, and Kevin Lanzo. Kimberly is an attorney in our Healthcare Life Sciences and Education group. She also co-leads the firm's Psychedelic and Emerging Therapies practice group. She's a seasoned professional with a rich background in biotech research, leveraging her extensive experience to guide clients through the intricate landscape of clinical trials and academic research compliance. With a unique perspective gained from her experience in biotech startups, Kimberly combines legal acumen with scientific insight. Natasha is an attorney in our Healthcare Life Sciences and Education group, and she co-leads the Psychedelics and Emerging Therapies practice group with Kimberly and I. She's well-versed in the historical and current psychedelic research, including recent FDA-approved studies on MDMA and psilocybin use for mental health and end-of-life issues, the legalization and decriminalization of psilocybin in numerous cities and states, and biotech and pharmaceutical research. Natasha supports clients throughout the entire process of drug development, from early research to clinical trial permission to final approval for supplying a drug to the public. And we are thrilled to be joined here today by Kevin Lanzo. Kevin is a pharmacist, clinical scientist, and consultant specializing in researching the clinical effects of psychoactive medicines. As president of Pharmaca Clinical Consulting, LLC, Kevin supports the development of novel psychiatric treatments for mental health disorders. He brings 5 years of pharmaceutical industry experience at the renowned global pharmaceutical company Roche Genentech, where he worked in late-stage clinical development. During his tenure at Genentech, Kevin investigated the potential of psychedelics and psychoplastogens as novel psychiatric medications. His roles included clinical development planning, business development, and partnership strategies, and education and advocacy. As a consultant, Kevin now assists small companies and founders with developing clinical development strategies for researching psychedelics. Kevin is also the co-founder and president of the Psychedelic Pharmacists Association. And here's a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to start us off today on the easy part by giving us a very broad and high-level overview of the regulatory framework we are working under, before passing the baton over to Kevin, who's going to be who'll be discussing a review of clinical trials and intended use of MDMA, and discuss Lykos Therapeutics' new drug application for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy and the FDA's response, which just happened this past Friday, and some valuable insights we've learned from that process. Next, Kim will discuss REMS, risk evaluation mitigation strategy, including for strategies for compliance with REMS, with a focus on the proposed REMS for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, and insights on the impact and lessons from Lykos's REMS strategy. Finally, Natasha will discuss informed consent and ethical considerations, making sure we all get a solid grasp on those important topics. So let's get started, shall we? Right, so as I just said, we are going to talk about REMS in a moment, and I know many of you are familiar with the intricacies of designing them and crafting a strategy around an effective REMS for FDA approval. But before we get there, I really want to talk a little broader than REMS. Let's back up and consider risk mitigation as a larger strategy and why that's important. Risk assessment and mitigation isn't just about following the law and making sure your drug can be approved by the FDA or that you don't go to jail. Everyone operating in this space needs to learn about and understand risk mitigation because of the risk of civil lawsuits. I'm admittedly biased here because that's what I do all day, is defending companies who are on the receiving end of these lawsuits, but it's really not an exaggeration that at all, that a single lawsuit brought in the right jurisdiction can end in a verdict that is so large it will sink your company. Every lawsuit in the area of toxic substances, especially if it involves perceived injury to a person or group of people, is a bet the company case. So understanding the risks and how to manage them makes you a harder target for these lawsuits. And in the event you are involved in one, can drastically lower the value of any of these lawsuits. So making sure that you protect the company, its people, and all of the investment, both monetarily and really just the blood, sweat, and tears that this has gone into is what risk mitigation is all about. And it's risk mitigation that ensures that the good work that is going on in this field that has the potential to help so many people can continue. And that includes understanding the current legal status of psychedelic-assisted therapy in the United States. Ketamine is a Schedule III controlled substance. But aside from ketamine, all of the other drugs that people usually think about when they think psychedelic therapy, MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, ayahuasca, DMT, these are all Schedule I controlled substances. And the only legal use of a Schedule I controlled substance is for research or drug development under a valid DEA license. Now that seems like a really straightforward statement, but we get asked all sorts of questions all the time about the legality of psychedelics, and it really all comes back to this statement that's up on the screen. I think this often gets overlooked in the incitement and enthusiasm that is happening in the community. There are a lot of great things happening, but for people conducting a business, the rules are the rules, for now at least. There is a lot going on legislatively, but federally, all Schedule I controlled substances remain illegal for any purpose other than research and drug development. Now, there's the world's smallest asterisk here when you consider sacramental religious practice and the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, but that's really beyond the scope of today's talk. But just remember that for all intents and purposes, this avenue is not available for psychedelic businesses. So let's start with a high-level overview of the legal framework governing psychedelic drug development. Federal Register 21 USC sections 811 and 814 are known as the CSA, or Controlled Substances Act. It was passed in 1970. The CSA establishes a closed system of distribution with 5 schedules of controlled substances. It regulates prescriptions and record retention of drugs, and works in conjunction with state laws governing controlled substances. Following the passage of the CSA in 1973, the DEA was established to coordinate federal drug control activities. The DEA is authorized to register dispensers, practitioners, and pharmacies. And in addition, the CSA requires the FDA to inform the DEA of drugs that appear to have abuse potential. Another statute I want to mention is the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA. This act requires the Department of Defense to establish a process by which service members with PTSD or traumatic brain injury could participate in clinical trials involving psilocybin, MDMA, or other psychedelics. So again, a lot of promising things happening in statutes. Now, a quick note on REMS, which Kim will be discussing in detail in a few minutes. For any newcomers amongst us, REMS stands for Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy. REMS programs are designed to ensure that a drug's benefits outweigh its risks and to enable patients to continue accessing the medicine. REMS programs focus on preventing, monitoring, and managing specific serious risks by educating and reinforcing actions to reduce the frequency and severity of the event. The specifics of the REMS program vary from drug to drug, and can include a medication guide, patient package insert, or communication plan. A drug manufacturer develops the REMS program, which the FDA then reviews and approves. A REMS is required for FDA approval of all drugs with abuse potential. In addition, the FDA can require a REMS for prescription drugs and biologics that have serious safety concerns. So this is really just an issue of balancing on two scales. On one side, we have the potential of life-altering treatment, and on the other, the risks associated with that very same medication, particularly those with abuse potential. And these risks aren't taken lightly, and they necessitate a rigorous evaluation to ensure that the therapeutic benefits justify their use. A number of factors inform REMS, including the size of the population, the seriousness of the disease sought to be treated, the expected benefit, expected or actual duration of treatment, seriousness of adverse events, and whether the drug is a new molecular entity. So what happens after a drug gets approved by the FDA? Well, the DEA has a tight time frame of 90 days to act on this recommendation and potentially reschedule the drug. This is critical because the rescheduling or the scheduling determines the drug's accessibility to patients and prescribers, as well as its regulatory controls. This isn't the end of the story. After the DEA makes its move, the curtain rises for the states. And here's where the plot thickens and diversity comes into play. States tackle this issue in a few different ways. Some states, sort of like synchronized swimmers, align perfectly with the federal rescheduling, and that ensures a uniform approach from coast to coast. In other cases, a state agency steps into the spotlight, taking on the role of deciding the drug's fate within their borders, and they carefully weigh the factors before making the call on the drug schedule. Lastly, there's the legislative approach. Some states have their legislature get involved, and the decision to reschedule or not lies in their hands. So we are going to switch gears a little bit here as I hand this next part over to Kevin Lanzo, who will discuss how all this applies in the context of clinical trials for substances like MDMA. The floor is yours, Kevin.
Thanks so much, Karen. Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Kevin Lanzo. I am a pharmacist and a clinical scientist, as well as a psychopharmacology consultant, and it's my pleasure to join you all this morning alongside Husch Blackwell and to share some of my expertise in the clinical trials and the unfolding of this process that's been occurring specifically with the new drug application for Lykos Therapeutics MDMA-assisted therapy. So first, just a bit more about myself. As I said, I am the principal consultant at Pharmaca Clinical Consulting. It's a boutique consulting firm dedicated to supporting small companies in psychiatric and psychedelic drug development. We specialize in business development, product development, and clinical trial design. I'm looking to help new companies entering this space, as well as individuals that are working in clinics to broaden expansion to psychedelic care. And you can find me and Pharmaca Clinical Consulting on LinkedIn, and I welcome any inquiries there. Okay. I'm also the president of the Psychedelic Pharmacist Association, as Karen mentioned earlier. It's a professional, nonprofit, education-based association dedicated to expanding the role of pharmacists in psychedelics, as well as providing education around psychedelics to the public. And we'll get more into the role of professional associations a little bit later in this presentation. But for now, let's jump right in. And I want to begin by giving a bit more context around the role of the FDA in the surge in psychedelic drug development that's been happening over the last decade or so. So on this slide, on the right here, there's a graphic which I really like to show. It was created by my colleague Michael Hyken, who supports Psychedelic Alpha. And reading the content is not important for this purpose, but I just want you to know that each of those little dots and text on this circle graph they represent a company that is currently conducting research into psychedelics along the FDA pathway. And any company in this 4 inner rings are conducting human clinical trials as we speak. So that is to say that there's a lot of interest in this space over the last decade, and that IND submissions, or the investigational new drug application for psychedelics and adjacent compounds like empathogens, entheogens, and psychoplastogens are really surging. And that, by my estimate, over 60 compounds were in human trials in 2023. So that should give you a little bit of context of the urgency of these matters and the relevance currently. And the FDA has been overall rather supportive of this new paradigm of psychiatric treatment. This can be viewed based off of their granting of breakthrough therapy designation, which is a very special designation granted to certain clinical investigations of medicines that represents a need far above and beyond the current standard of care. And so far, 5 investigational psychedelics have been granted this breakthrough therapy designation since 2017. That includes the MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD from Lykos Therapeutics, Compass Pathways psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression, Usona Institute psilocybin for major depressive disorder, Cybin's deuterated psilocybin for major depressive disorder, and MindMed's LSD D-tartrate for general anxiety disorder. So lots of psychiatric conditions over there, which all have a significant need given the lack of innovative treatments over the last few decades, a couple of decades or so. There still have been treatments that have been created in these areas, but these represent a significant development. Okay. Additionally, the FDA has taken the great effort to release a guidance document for the clinical investigation of psychedelics rather recently. This was from June of 2023 for the purpose of informing industry research and generally to clear up a lot of uncertainties in the investigation of psychedelics. This guidance document is considered a draft, and there was many comments submitted on the draft guidance as soon as released, over 200 comments by industry sponsors, nonprofits, academic researchers. And the guidance document itself contains essential topics such as how to assess the abuse potential of psychedelics, various challenges with the placebo control in these trials, which we'll get into in a moment, methods of preventing the unblinding of these studies, as well as recommendations on how to conduct the therapy element of the psychedelic-assisted therapy paradigm. I highly recommend anyone interested in researching these drugs to take a look at this guidance document. Okay, now I'll shift gears into reviewing the direct chain of events leading up to the FDA's evaluation of MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. So that the company who submitted the new drug application, which is Lykos Therapeutics, has been conducting clinical trials on MDMA for a long time. Originally created as the organization MAPS, or Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, they branched out into the for-profit or public benefit corporation, Lykos Therapeutics, some years ago. And after completing 6 phase 2 trials, by my estimation, and 2 phase 3 studies, they submitted their new drug application to the FDA. And just in this past June, the FDA called together the Psychopharmacologic Drugs Advisory Committee to review the application. So this committee, which I abbreviate as PDAC for simplicity here, meets periodically to review major decisions on investigational psychopharmacology products at the FDA's invitation. So not every drug that comes through will receive this attention, but if there's some challenging questions, the committee can help the FDA decide. And these the recommendations of this committee are not binding, but they do directly inform the FDA's decision on whether to approve the drug or not. and can have a significant impact on the application, as did indeed happen in the case of the MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD in this case. And yeah, to state it directly, the FDA's review resulted in declining to approve the MDMA-assisted therapy as currently submitted in the new drug application. And the FDA returned a complete response letter back to Lykos Therapeutics just this past Friday, August 9th, detailing the contents of their rejection and what is needed to proceed forward, which I'll come back to in just a moment. But is definitely a big news for the field, and we will unpack what that means for the industry here today. But first, what is MDMA and why is it being used for PTSD under this paradigm? So just a bit of to expand on this, the MDMA-assisted therapy paradigm is something that is not new to Lykos Therapeutics, but was packaged into their new drug application as the entire treatment, which is a novel paradigm in that most treatments that go through the FDA are just drugs alone, or drugs plus REMS programs and other supportive devices, et cetera. But this is the first one to include therapy as a package deal. MDMA is thought to work very well with the therapy component because it is considered an empathogen, facilitating introspective reflection and generally engaging with one's past memories and traumatic experiences in a way that can provoke the reprocessing emotions and overcoming things that have been long held deep into a person's psyche and continue to arise without being able to be resolved, as happens in PTSD. So there's a lot of science to discuss there, but for the sake of the time in this presentation, we'll say that it has been rather successful in the clinical trials that have been conducted in phase 2 and phase 3, improving outcomes significantly in the patients studied over the course of more than a year after the treatments of only 2 to 3 treatment sessions with MDMA, which can last 4 to 6 hours in duration. Okay. The treatment was successful in clinical trials, but when reviewed by the PDAC committee, there were some very notable absences from the application that were discussed, including problems with the unblinding of the trials, some very high-profile incidents of therapist misconduct, as well as inadequate collection of euphoria events, euphoria being the feeling of joy and bliss that comes if a person takes a drug, typically considered a drug of abuse, but it's just as a symptom of heightened feelings. It can be a clue that there is abuse potential to the drug. And this is why the PDAC committee was reticent about the lack of collection of this event. Okay, moving forward here. The committee was asked to discuss the risk-benefit profile of the product, the MDMA-assisted therapy product, and how it affected the potential public health impact. There's 2 questions here were the most essential for the committee to discuss: whether the data showed that the drug is effective in treatment of patients with PTSD, and whether the benefits of the FDA's proposed REMS program for MDMA outweigh the risk for the treatment of patients with PTSD. And the committee decided that the answer was no to both of these questions. And the first vote had a result of 10-2 against showing efficacy. That is, the 2 members of the committee did say that they believe that it did. And for the risk-benefit profile, it was 11-1 against. So 1 member of the committee still believed that it showed benefit. So quite overwhelmingly, a no result here. And just to highlight that Kim will cover the REMS program as proposed very shortly to provide more detail there. And one other point, actually, that in the question number 1, the way that it was written is important to note that if they were asked about whether the drug was effective, not the drug therapy combination. And this is important because the FDA has never really evaluated a therapy combination before, and there's constant roadblocks in deciding which is the cause of benefit, whether it's the therapy or the drug. So this may have complicated the voting matters as well.
Great, thank you so much, Kevin.
Yes, I'll pass it over to Kim now to continue with the overview of the REMS program. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm Kim Chu. I'm part of the Husch Blackwell team, psychedelics and emerging therapies. So I'm going to be covering just briefly the proposed REMS program. As we know, was, as Kevin just explained, was voted down. So there was, at that PDAC meeting, the Psychopharmacologic Advisory Committee meeting, a discussion unfolded around the proposed REMS program for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. So FDA and, well, basically Lykos highlighted several cornerstones for the strategy and presented it to the PDAC, to the committee as their strategy for ensuring patient safety. So first, only certified healthcare settings would be allowed to dispense MDMA, which would create a controlled environment for its therapeutic use. Additionally, a patient registry for long-term monitoring was proposed to track outcomes and inform future practices. There are also a key safety measure that was included was the presence of not 1, but 2 healthcare providers during MDMA therapy sessions, which were aimed to provide immediate support for any issues arising during the intense experiences that were anticipated for the treatment of PTSD. And lastly, they proposed a comprehensive patient counseling on MDMA's effects and risks, which are deemed essential for informed consent, which actually Natasha will be covering later on in this presentation. But as Kevin mentioned, despite these stringent proposals, they did not satisfy the PDAC's concerns. And this reflects the cautious stance of authorities towards the therapeutic use of psychedelics and points to continued demand for robust, multifaceted risk mitigation strategies. So just to go over, additionally, as many on this call probably have heard, there were much activity was going on after the negative response and feedback from the PDAC June meeting, one of which was Lykos Therapeutics on August 1st. They announced several other measures, such as the formation of an independent advisory board. So this advisory board was set to play a critical role in guiding the foundational aspects of their launch, which didn't happen, but with the focus on 3 main areas: the development of comprehensive therapy training programs, the establishment of ethical best practices, and the integration of psychedelic therapies within the healthcare system. So Lykos was also on track to forge partnerships with elite behavioral health centers, specifically those equipped to meet the stringent monitoring requirements proposed by the FDA. The hope was that these centers would be pivotal in delivering not just therapy, but integrated, high-quality care that aligns, with good high health standards and regulatory expectations. And then Lykos also announced the intent to collaborate with many esteemed institutions to enhance therapy training, since this would be a new form of therapy. And then to go back to the proposed REMS that Lykos had proposed to the PDAC, it would have shaped the landscape of psychedelic-assisted therapy. It had stringent requirements for safe administration and control of MDMA. It emphasized the mitigation of risks and maximization of therapeutic benefits. But again, it wasn't enough. So, but we're going to dive into it anyway to see currently what was not enough. I mean, there's 2 questions, as Kevin mentioned earlier. This pertains to the second question. So had MDMA-assisted therapy been approved, it would not have been as simple as just adding another medication to a pharmacy's repertoire. Instead, there would have been rigorous certification requirements set in place, a path that healthcare facilities would have needed to trek with diligence and precision to become authorized providers. For a facility to step into the world of psychedelic-assisted therapy, it would not have just been about the right equipment or the right staff. It would also entail a deep dive through meticulously designed certification channels. Think of it as a specialized course with rigorous tests and checkpoints, each designed to ensure that every facility meets a strict set of standards before they can offer this innovative therapy, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. So facilities that were looking to gain the certification would have had to cast a critical eye inward, evaluating every aspect of their operations against the criteria set forth by the REMS program. It was a program that placed patient safety at the helm, aligned with complexity and sensitivity that the psychedelic-assisted therapies demand. This would have meant closely reviewing infrastructure for security measures, training protocols for clinicians, patient monitoring systems, emergency response plans to ensure compliance with safety and operational protocols. It was a multifaceted, multi-stage endeavor that would ask for nothing less than the highest commitment to structural, professional, and ethical standards. So it would not have been just, this kind of certification would not have just signified a facility's ability to administer a medication. It would symbolize an investment into innovative therapy backed by adherence to operational integrity and unwavering commitment to patient care. So had MDMA-assisted therapy received regulatory approval, it would have necessitated the establishment of stringent management protocols within the healthcare settings where it was made available. Healthcare providers would have found themselves at the forefront of designing and implementing controlled processes specifically tailored for MDMA management. So such processes would have entailed the institution of secure storage solutions akin to vaults, where MDMA would be safeguarded under lock and key, accessible only to authorized personnel. This level of security would ensure that the substance was protected from any unauthorized access, thereby maintaining strict control over its distribution. In parallel, a precise inventory tracking system would have been indispensable. And through this system, each dose of MDMA would have been accounted for from the moment it arrives at the facility until it was dispersed. Real-time tracking would have provided a clear an audit trail, paper trail that confirmed when, where, and whom the medication was given, mirroring the rigidity of narcotic control in pharmacy regulations. Furthermore, dispensing procedures would have been put in place, ensuring that each administration of the drug was not only accurately accounted for, but also aligned with the medically approved indication. These procedures would have been systematically designed to eliminate any margin for error or potential abuse. And these comprehensive measures were aimed squarely at preventing the potential misuse or diversion of the medication. It would have been safeguarded by layers of checks and balances that healthcare providers are familiar with, ensuring that its purpose for therapeutic use was protected and its administration was carried out with the utmost integrity. The proposed REMS also included a patient registry system. This system would have been a fundamental pillar for managing and overseeing patient treatments on a broad scale. The implementation of such a patient registry system would have not just been beneficial, but crucial for tracking patient treatments. It would have acted as a central repository for the collection of invaluable data, including detailed patient experiences, therapeutic outcomes, and any adverse events that might occur. This extensive data collection was vital, as it would have offered clinicians and researchers a wealth of insight that could have driven future therapeutic strategies and refinement of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy protocols. Moreover, beyond the mere collection of data, the strength of the patient registry system would have hinged on the precision and reliability of which this information was recorded. So comprehensive staff training was necessary. Effective functioning of the registry would not only demand technical proficiency, but also a deep understanding of the ethical implications, ensuring all captured data is both accurate and treated with the utmost confidentiality. This training program would have affected many healthcare professionals, from physicians to administrative personnel. and they would have been tasked with input and management of the registry information effectively, ensuring not only data integrity, but patient privacy standards. In essence, this registry system, empowered by well-trained staff, would have been a resource, potentially illuminating the pathway for ongoing improvements in MDMA-assisted psychotherapy in its delivery and outcomes, had it been approved. The proposed REMS also included what I alluded to briefly in the previous slide was staff training and certification. This would have been a comprehensive framework for staff for training that would have come into play that entailed significant preparation for health providers to be deemed qualified in order to administer this new form of therapy, psychedelic-assisted therapy. So professional staff, including therapists, nurses, and support personnel, would have needed to undergo a series of specialized training programs, a bit like an intensive course designed to equip them with the knowledge and skills crucial for navigating the complexities of this new form of therapy. This educational investment would have ensured that they were well-versed in both the transformative potential as well as the unique challenges of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. So more than just understanding how to administer the medication, the staff would have been trained on all aspects of the REMS program that pertain to MDMA. This would have been akin to a pilot learning all about the safety protocols and emergency procedures related to their aircraft. So knowing REM-specific procedures would have empowered that team, the healthcare team, to implement each step with precision, tailoring the therapy to individual needs and responding to patients should anything adverse come up. Envisioning this as a comprehensive drill where healthcare providers align with best practices to offer safe and controlled treatment environments. Every session of therapy under such a system would be conducted with the goal of minimizing risks, maximizing therapeutic benefits, and ensuring the well-being and safety of the patient. Ultimately, well-trained staff would not just be facilitators of the therapy, they would be custodians of patient trust and safety, upholding the highest standards of therapeutic care in this innovative field. So one of the hallmarks, this was under some controversy originally about how many providers would have to be present during the therapeutic, or at least during the administration of the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. And so the proposed REMS actually, really was thought carefully through this and did stick with not one, but two therapists to be present during the MDMA administration session. That we could go into the protocol later. That wasn't approved. So we're not going to do that right now at this point. But just so everyone understands, this was meant to. The reason to have two people, a dual presence, involved during MDMA administration was to foster supportive and secure therapeutic environment to ensure patients felt not just monitored medically, but genuinely supported throughout their entirety of their intense experience. Therefore, looking ahead, should the FDA greenlight MDMA-assisted therapy in the future, the landscape may look very different. Professionals within the field anticipate that an evolved REMS program forged in the wake of feedback and scrutiny would be more robust and even more stringent. The commitment to ensuring that a drug's benefits resoundingly outweigh its risks would be reflected in a REMS that's even possibly more comprehensive and more fail-safe than previously discussed. So with that, I've covered what was presented to at the PDAC. So Natasha is going to be discussing additional considerations with psychedelic therapeutics.
Great, thank you, Kim. All right, so yeah, as Kim said, I'm Natasha, and I'm gonna just briefly go through some sort of risk mitigation considerations for your psychedelic-assisted therapy clinic, which right now will only be a ketamine-assisted clinic, right? Because as unfortunately we're talking about MDMA, NDA was not approved. So currently it's CAP only. So I'm going to talk just briefly about a couple of FDA risk alerts that went out about ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. And then I'm going to talk about some practice considerations and go into a little bit of detail on the informed consent process. So there were two FDA risk alerts. One came out February 16th, 2022, and then the next one came out October of 2023. And these are important because many of the clinics that do cap compound their medication. And so, the initial alert that came out in 2022 was addressing compounded ketamine nasal spray. So the first point that the FDA wanted to make in this alert is that, first and foremost, ketamine is not, this type of ketamine is not approved for the treatment of any psychiatric disorder. And also, compounded drugs are not under FDA approval. So compounding, for the most part, there are some FDA regulations that do regulate compounding pharmacies, but for the most part, it's compounding is done kind of at the state level. So, so one of the, and as many of you are familiar with Spravato, so the FDA wanted to remind folks that there are risks associated with Spravato. Spravato is under a REMS program. And, you know, some of these risks are sedation, dissociation, abuse, misuse, and those sorts of things, which is why they were issuing this risk alert. Because if you're using a non-Spravato medication and you're not following, you know, what's going on in the REMS, there is potentially a high risk to the patient. And in that same 2022 risk alert, the FDA just touched on some adverse events. I think they found, 5 adverse events in the adverse event reporting system between 2016 and 2021. Of course, that doesn't mean there were only 5. There could have been many more that just were not reported. But some of these adverse events were things like delusion, hallucinations, panic attacks, and then some abuse and misuse. And that was specifically following this nasal spray. So then in 2023, the FDA then issued a second sort of risk alert warning, again, you know, reminding compounding ketamine, and it's not FDA approved, and you know, FDA is not really, you need monitoring by healthcare, both for the maybe potential psychological effects of ketamine, but also the physical effects, the effect on blood pressure and heart rate. They talked briefly about some of the known safety concerns of using ketamine. Just mentioned blood pressure, slower breathing, bladder symptoms, which is actually a known potential issue with, I think it's listed in the esketamine product, and then some of the psychiatric issues, and then of course abuse and misuse ketamine. And then, you know, again, mentioning just briefly, you need to be monitored, you know, so the telehealth is probably not the safest. Because again, we can't monitor if somebody is not there in the room with you. So why is that important? Well, if you do have a ketamine practice, you know, you should read those risk alerts and take those into consideration when you are thinking about your practice and what are those potential risks. So I've listed out here, you know, obviously this is not a complete list and we don't have a huge amount of time, but these are kind of some of the main, I guess, issues that I wanted to just highlight for you all when, you know, that you should all think about. So patient selection criteria, you know, things like who is best suited for this type of therapy. Treatment location, as I just said, telehealth, you know, is it going to be done at like a brick and mortar, and is there somebody there with the patient, or are they going to be at home, and that kind of thing. Again, patient monitoring, which is kind of part of that treatment location, making sure that, you know, that you have somebody that can monitor for the physical effects as well as the psychological effects. Scope of practice is a big one. So being very careful about who's doing what within the practice, right? So who's actually prescribing needs to be done by, the MD, who's administering it, who's overseeing it. Making sure if you have a therapist in the room, that therapist is not doing the monitoring of things like blood pressure. They're not allowed to do that under their scope of practice. One of the big ones, and I tell this basically to every medical practice that I help and assist, is having robust policies and procedures. And so just making sure that you have these written programs that everybody within the practice knows and that they're updated. They talk about, the regulatory scheme, federal laws, state laws, and that, everybody is aware of these policies and procedures. And then that they're trained on those. I think Kim mentioned that earlier about, training on like a REMS. And so having, even if there isn't a REMS, having appropriate training and obviously making sure that the folks who are doing, this kind of goes with scope of practice, but that they have the proper qualifications to be doing what they're doing within your CAP practice. Insurance, that's a big one. And there are a couple of different insurance that just off the top of my head, I thought of that were, I think, important to mention. Malpractice, obviously. General liability, so covering, the building and what might happen in there in terms of like a slip and fall or, those types of things. And then cyber liability, which is a really big one these days. And we do not have time to get into that, but happy to, expand on those. You all can email me. And one thing I wanted to mention I thought was interesting is that there are a lot of malpractice insurance carriers that don't allow a prescriber and then a therapist who work in the same practice to do like a split treatment. So I say that that's one of many things that may not be allowed, but making sure that you ask all the right questions or have an attorney, take a look at the policy to make sure that the practice is covered, not just do you cover ketamine therapy, but something like this, where there's a split type of treatment, because it may be something that you aren't thinking about. And then again, for malpractice carriers, sometimes they'll offer a general liability, like an add-on. And there is some language in there that would likely limit their general liability coverage to claims or suits resulting from a professional incident that arises out of the profession. And that sometimes can, whether or not, CAP is considered part of the profession in that state where they're practicing, it could be an issue. So again, these are very kind of, they seem tangential or, just not maybe so kind of in your face, you may not be thinking about those, but they're things that are really important, obviously, because you want to make sure that, if something were to happen, that you're covered. And then informed consent is the last one here, which I'm going to go into a little bit of detail. So these are just some of the, again, not everything, but some of the things that I think are important that should be in an informed consent in the written, as well as having discussions with the patient. So, and obviously informed consent needs to come before you do your CAP treatment. So you want to talk about what are the risks and the benefits of this, ketamine assisted therapy. I think it's really important to mention to people that this is an off-label use, right? Ketamine is not approved in this way for depression and the things that a lot of CAP clinics are using it for. It doesn't mean that it's not, that you can't do it, right? It just means that I think it's part of this managing expectations that it is off-label. Maybe even here at the bottom, I have state of scientific knowledge, talking about what does science say to us right now about using ketamine for whatever the indication is that you're wanting to use it for on this patient. Talking to the patient about their eligibility and contraindications, making sure that you get that full medical history from them, because, again, you want to make sure that you limit potential adverse and especially serious adverse, events. Talking about what to expect. What is this like? What are the side effects? What are the potential adverse events? With a dissociative like this, could be scary for somebody who's never done any kind of a psychedelic type drug. So again, talking to them about what that might feel like for them. Abuse potential. Ketamine is used out in the world as a, I guess, party drug and those sorts of things. So, I don't have any of the numbers on that, but that might be something that you would want to talk about with them, especially if somebody might have a history of drug addiction or drug abuse and that sort of thing. And then I think it's important also to talk with folks about the alternative treatments. Now, many people that go to CAT clinics probably have done a lot of the conventional treatments, SSRIs and conventional therapy. But again, making sure that, so there's two words to this, right? Informed and consent. So the informed part, making sure they have all the information necessary for them to say voluntarily that they are accepting the risks, because those risks, the benefits outweigh the risks, and that they want to go forward with this, knowing that there may be, one, it may not work, and two, there may be some potential adverse events or side effects. So none of that is to sort of scare you, but I think really at the end of the day, just to really help you in your clinic to limit, as Karen talked about in the beginning, limit the risk of litigation, which has happened in the CAP arena. So lastly, I just put this up here. So it's 21 CFR 50 governs the informed consent process for clinical research, but I put it up here because I think, it's a really important, you can follow this. I mean, the government is pretty strict, right, on informed consent, particularly around clinical research. So I think this is really informative and might help you in terms of how you want to, lay out your informed consent. And then of course you can always ask an attorney to help you with drafting those informed consents to make sure that, you're using your best practices. So that's all I've got. And I'm going to hand it back to Kevin to close us out. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Natasha. And I'll take it from here to the close. Thanks for your time, everyone. I just want to jump back into thinking about what are the next steps from here. Now that there was this FDA rejection for MDMA-assisted therapy, what is the path for psychedelics to eventually get to patients, get to our clinics? What does it look from here? What can we learn from these unfoldings? So what I would advise anyone to think about is that the next psychedelic likely to reach the finish line, and by that I mean for FDA review, is Compass Pathways psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. And it looks from the current state of their clinical trials like this may be around 2026. That's usually how I describe it. So it may be a 2-year setback based off of these events with MDMA, but it's not all bad because there's a lot that we can learn from how this process with the FDA unfolded. But a quick note before getting into that about what it means for Lykos themselves. So Lykos was sent a complete response letter just this past Friday, rejecting the approval of MDMA. In this complete response letter, the FDA required them to conduct an additional phase 3 study in order to reapply for approval. So this additional phase 3 study is an enormous requirement that may take tens to hundreds of millions of dollars in multiple years. So it's a very steep ask for a small company like Lykos. Lykos has stated that they will appeal the decision with the FDA, and there is a process for going through the appeals. And some may say, what's the point of appealing? If it seems, based on the PDEC meeting, it was very unlikely. There are actually some statistics that say that only 16% of appeals that are accepted on FDA rejections go through, which means that there was an 84% chance that it will not. But I would advise that there may still be a benefit to this appealing, in that the process for submitting another new drug application may end up being more streamlined based on their appeal than what is currently described by their complete response letter. So they may not be required to do a full phase 3 trial. To be determined. More news to come on that in the future. But okay, some clear lessons that we can take away here. There was an enormous divisiveness in the discussions about how the FDA responded to the therapy pairing with the drug. So we can rightly assume that other drug companies will decrease the intensity of the therapy in their protocols at the very least. So we're likely to see more focus on the drug research. And this is because FDA seems not to want to regulate drugs so much as, FDA wants to regulate drugs. They don't want to regulate therapy. Yeah. So perhaps other professionals will need to step up in this avenue. We may expect that the REMS program, as Kim described earlier, may be very similar or more intense for psilocybin, but we can assume that based on the FDA's description, it will be somewhat similar to what is described now. And if therapy regulation isn't going to be covered by the FDA, it may fall to licensing boards, professional associations, and health systems instead. So just quickly here, presenting a new perspective on how that could unfold. So if the FDA does not regulate the practice of medicine, state medical boards do that instead. So who will regulate psychedelic practitioners? Well, there are some organizations that have formed called like the Board of Psychedelic Medicine and Therapies, or BPMT, which hope to unify the industry of psychedelic therapists and create guidelines and certifications and those sorts of processes, which I would advise are very likely to maintain order better than the very top-down approach would. And then other professional psychedelic pharmacists, nurses, and psychedelic medicine practitioners, so that is to say physicians, will also play a huge role here in education and setting the ethical standards. And you can see that, shout out to the Psychedelic Pharmacist Association where we're working to develop some of those. Okay, that's all. So in summary here, the last couple of minutes, there were multiple clinical development problems that have come up with Lykos Therapeutics MDMA trials and organizational issues that led to the FDA rejection. There's many of these that we can learn from for future trials and future practice of psychedelic medicine. Despite the rejection, psychedelic medicine as a whole seems very promising, and that any issues that were described in the proceedings were with Lykos's NDA in particular, and that psychedelic medicine still seems to have a positive outlook for regulators and patients, with perhaps a lower focus on psychotherapy, and overall more collaboration between federal institutions, professional organizations, and academic institutions will be necessary to unfold this into the public world. So thank you. Any other additional remarks from my colleagues here before we close?
I'll just really quickly answer. There's two questions here, but one will be very quick to answer. The other one we'll have to answer offline in an email. But somebody asked about how nasal spray is not FDA approved for the treatment of any psychiatric disorder, but is being used to do so. And I think you're referring to esketamine. Spravato. Spravato is a derivative. It's a form of ketamine. It's an S form. I'm not a scientist. Someone else can chime in on that. But ketamine in and of itself is not approved for any kind of treatment of psychiatric. It's used then as an anesthetic. So esketamine is a kind of a form of it. So that's why there's a differentiation between those two. So that's it.
All right, sorry we ran out of time to answer all the questions today, but thank you very much for joining us today. We hope the information was helpful to you and your organization. As a reminder, this program has been approved for legal education hours, and to report your hours, click on the CEU icon at the bottom of the screen. A certificate of attendance, including course numbers, will be emailed to you tomorrow, along with the recording of the webcast for watching and sharing. Be sure to complete our short survey, please. We really appreciate it, and we use your feedback to plan future programs that are applicable to you and your business needs. This concludes our webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.